Mic check, 1 2 1 2.
Can we get serious now?
One thing that did happen during the 60s was some music of an unusual or experimental nature did get recorded and did get released. Now look at who the executives were in those companies at those times. Not hip young guys. These were cigar-chomping old guys who looked at the product that came and said, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Record it, stick it out. If it sells, all right. We were better off with those guys than we are now with the supposedly hip young executives who are making the decisions of what people should see and hear in the marketplace.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to the business side of music.
In the studio here today in Nashville, Tennessee, Kyle McEvoy, who is a 24-year-old multi-instrumentalist. That's a big word in itself.
Yeah, it is.
Songwriter and producer. In 2018, he founded a recording studio and label called Sonder House, which is home to over 50-plus modern classical, ambient, and instrumental musicians. I got to tell you, that's kind of a nice melting pot of artistry there.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man.
You're one of those guys that actually found us. You did a little search and said, hey, I found the business side of music.
Yep.
And I want to be on. And we got to talking about, some of the bullet points that you discussed. So, we got a lot of things to go over. I guess one of the things I want to talk about, because I want to talk about the future of music distribution.
Yep.
But first of all, how did you get started in this business?
I really got started kind of the complete opposite of what I'm doing now. I started out at like a really young age when I was like 14 years old. I grew up in like Connecticut in a suburban just kind of part where there was no music, just music venues or anything that was really like established just for music. So I went to like one show at this it was called Cafe Napoli. It was like this little coffee shop that was like, it was just like a small business that actually wasn't really doing too well. And so they started letting kids book shows in the back of it. And I mean, it was like the way we always described it was kind of like Woodstock for like 15 and 16-year-olds. It was just every weekend we'd book shows and like hundreds of kids would come out, pack into the back of this little room. All types of bands would play. And that's like what really, that's just when I started playing guitar. And so I kind of like learned from the older kids there that were doing it. I started booking my own shows. And then I think at like a certain point, I noticed that this was like when MySpace was a thing and I think Facebook was just kind of starting. Yeah, I just noticed this whole point where like it kind of went from local bands to then bands outside of the area would start contacting me and being like, our friends said they went to a show there. It was really good. Can you maybe book a show for us on tour? And then it kind of just set off this whole, like, I loved like the social aspect of it. So yeah, from that point I started, I had a band called The Guru. That was like my high school. We were just like an indie rock fun band. Right. Kind of started noticing this whole, like, I'd book a show for a band from out of state. They'd set up a show for us. And then, yeah, before I knew it, I was like 16, 17, and we were touring all around the U.S. And yeah, we did a couple like full U.S. tours, like 45, 50 dates. And
wow.
Yeah. So that's when I before I could really drink or any of that stuff. So I got into it that way. And then from there, it just kind of progressed to working with all types of different bands on the road. And
when you talk about things like, of course, Facebook is still really relevant, but you talk about things like MySpace. I mean, that kind of goes back a few years, because that used to be the hot trend, especially to find other songwriters. The dynamics of the industry have changed quite a bit. Yeah. Obviously, when I started in it 40 plus years ago, and we've talked about that before, we were still selling cassettes and CDs and some vinyl. It's changed so much now because, we talk about music distribution and haven't discussed this in a while, but when I worked at the record label, we used to have 26 major retail accounts that we put our music in. And within 7 years, that had dropped down to 6. I mean, we had lost so many of them. We had lost like Licorice Pizza and Tara Records and Warehouse and such. Where is music distribution these days, at least from your perspective?
I don't know. It's hard to, I'm still young, but I would say like even when I first got into the whole digital side of distribution and all that. I would say back in like 2013 or 2012, right when I was like getting my freshman year in college, that's when I got on some Spotify playlists. I started noticing some money coming in, and at that time I was just distributing through like CD Baby. And I never really thought too much about that side of it, because at that time Spotify was still like, Taylor Swift wasn't on there. You had all these bands that were still kind of trying to hold off on it and weren't putting their music on it.
Kind of a stand back and take a look approach.
Exactly. So I just thought of it as like a temporary thing, and I was like, oh, this is cool for now, but I kind of would, just plan other things. And then I think especially in the past year, I really started like, when you start making a substantial amount of money from streaming, you start getting in the distribution side, and like CD Baby I think takes like 8% or 9%, which really isn't that much, but if it's something that you've created and it's like really they're the only middleman that's keeping you from these platforms.
So what you're saying is there's actually money to be made from streaming.
Oh yeah,
out there.
Yeah,
because I hear so many horror stories about songwriters, especially how they used to get the nice royalty checks, and now it's gone streaming and it's pennies.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that I preach just to bands. It's really possible to make it sustainable. Like I moved to Woodstock, New York, almost like 3 years ago, and I just have been living off Spotify.
How do you make it sustainable?
There's definitely, I think, depending on which genre you're doing, like I kind of fell into this whole modern classical piano thing just on accident. And that kind of became my niche, because the way Spotify...
And let's clarify, that's not like a super hot, top 40 genre of music.
Yeah. Well, especially too, it's so different in terms of, I manage all types of artists, and, I've worked with, just in the label alone, over 50 artists already. Depending on who I'm working with, like for a band that's like a typical, singer-songwriter, Spotify isn't always the big breadwinner, as you know what I mean? I mean, there's also a difference, because like, I guess so much of it is passive listening versus active listening.
Mm-hmm.
Like my music is heard by millions and millions of people around the world, and some songs have like almost 10 million plays, but those aren't always active fans that are like...
So let's talk about the difference between active listening and passive.
Spotify has a lot of very like playlists that are geared towards, maybe you're trying to fall asleep, maybe you're studying. That's kind of the biggest niche, actually, I think, is college age students, or like people that work a day job and they just put on something in the background that's instrumental, that they don't want to distract them. If you look at the data and everything on Spotify artists versus like artists I manage that are singer-songwriters versus like the piano artists, you'll see even just a difference in like, maybe the piano artist has hundreds and thousands of more listeners, but there's not as many users like actively saving their music, going to buy merch.
So it's just kind of in the background, or as you said, it's just passive. Yeah.
Yep. And there's definitely, depending on like, over in London is a huge modern classical scene. There's guys that are just showing up to like 20,000 cap rooms playing a solo piano, and it's huge there. But over in the US, it really hasn't taken off.
That's something that I think a lot of artists seem to forget, that you have to get beyond the 48 states here sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
And we've had those conversations in the past that, maybe you're not successful here. And it could be because maybe just nobody understands you, they don't get your music or whatever. Yeah. But you could take that same music project and release it in Europe, especially maybe Eastern Europe, the United Kingdom, or you can release it down in South America, over in the Orient. And you might have an audience over there that you never thought, would subscribe to your music.
Yeah, and I think so much of it was, I started noticing that, and that's the beauty about it's overwhelming at times, but the fact that we have access to so much data, like I could just go on my Spotify, and I saw that majority of my fans were all around Asia or in London. So, now it's like I'm talking to booking agents in Beijing, and when I go to London, it's like I'm not a celebrity there, but it's like, when I go over there, people know who I am. There's a whole modern classical community, and then I could come back here and nobody knows who I am.
Walk the streets and
exactly.
not be, yeah.
So, it's strange, and yeah, with different bands I manage, that's something I tend to see, like they could tour big, like major cities over here, and, those are their markets, but they could go to London and they do super well over there for some reason. So
before we take a break, I want to ask you, transposing from the United States to England, or maybe I should say transposing from the United States over to Europe is one thing. Is it easier? Is it more difficult for an act to come from across the pond to the United States and break into the music scene here? Or
I think it's one of those things that really depends what genre you're doing everything. I mean, I remember I used to tour a bit with Cage the Elephant, who's, you know, in Nashville. Well, they were born in like Kentucky, Bowling Green, and then now they're, you know, just Nashville based. And I remember talking to them pretty in depth about how they were doing all right here, but never really took off. They went over to the UK, and I think they just like ate it up over there. You know, like these American guys from the country that were playing this like cool, badass rock and roll. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they really took off over there and then came back over and were already well known, you know, just from...
They got themselves established in a different market than probably what they originally considered.
I think it all definitely depends. I'm almost trying to do the opposite, kind of just like establish here, record over there. It's going well. And then, I think when I really like decide to do some big live shows or anything, I don't think it's going to be.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk some more with Kyle McEvoy, who is the head of Sonder House Records, home to over 50-plus modern classical, ambient, and instrumental musicians, and dig a little more into, you know, live off-streaming royalties and music distribution and a couple other things.
Hey guys, this is Danny Myrick, and you're listening to The Business Side of Music.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Hi, this is Vinny Rebus, the founder of Indie Connect. Our goal is to ensure that you have the knowledge, the tools, skills, resources, and connections that you need to develop a profitable and long-lasting career in music. One way we do this is through these Business Side of Music podcasts. I'd also like to invite you to check out Indie Connect magazine, our free multimedia online publication packed with practical interviews and advice from music industry experts. Go to www.indieconnectmag, that's www.indieconnectmag.com. Let us walk with you and guide you every step of your musical journey.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Hey, we're back in the studio here in Nashville, Tennessee with Kyle McEvoy, head of Sonder House record label and recording studio. And we've been talking a little bit about, of course, crossing the pond, getting your music heard, and being financially sustainable. I mean, it's really kind of the biggest crux that a lot of artists talk about these days. How do you find success in this digital age, and what does it mean to be an artist at this point?
I think kind of what I was talking about before. When I was back in like 2012 or 13, I just by chance got added to some bigger Spotify playlists. And I remember I was like, you know, a freshman in college, not really thinking about too much besides.
Were these Spotify playlists that you were on or just you were listening to? Or
These were editorial Spotify playlists curated by their staff there. And I think the first one that I was on was called Stress Relief, which had 400,000 listeners or something. So within a day, you just notice that huge spike. And I was kind of not really sure how that would play out. And then I think, Spotify pays out 3 months behind. So then 3 months from that, originally getting on that playlist, I think I got a check for $2,000. And this whole kind of thing in my brain was this could be something that I pursue and could make a living out of. And yeah, like I said, at that time, it was still very nobody knew what Spotify would grow into, I guess. It was a lot of artists didn't have their music on there. And
I think that's something else that we try to really clarify with our artists that we work with or we talk to, we consult, is that sustainable income is, what is your success? What do you envision as your success? Because I've had conversations where do you see yourself being successful? And they'll say, well, we want the private jet and the tour buses. And first of all, it's not really obtainable in most cases, and it's definitely not sustainable once you get there. So you really need to set a bar that's a little more realistic, but it's still something comfortable enough to where you could really do this as a living.
No, and I think that's whenever I work with an artist. I mean, I tend to work with artists that are really workhorses, people that they could just constantly write and record and give me things, and we could figure out release strategies. And I always kind of ask, like, what are your short and long-term goals? Because to me, that's the most important thing. Because if you don't have like a clear place you want to be,
You got to have a game plan.
oh yeah, exactly. And I think it's a lot of artists, it's like so overwhelming just with social media and all this that they don't even know where to start.
Do you think sometimes they kind of get hung up just in that world?
I think so much of it is like a lot of artists don't even think about, like, I can't tell you the amount of artists that I start working with, and like you'll go to Apple Music or Deezer, you know, something that's like not Spotify, and like they don't even they have the wrong content on their profiles. They don't have a picture or bio on it because, yeah, like something like Deezer in the US, not really a lot of people use it, but like the entire country of France, that's exclusively what they use.
And that's something to know. That's
Yeah.
Once again, it's important because if you're going to break somewhere outside of the lower 48 or the lower 50 in
Yeah.
the United States,
Yeah.
you know, and you want to break overseas somewhere, then you got to know these things.
Yeah, and even something like that, like I started noticing some royalties coming in from Deezer. I was able just to find, like, they list the name of the curators for their editorial playlist. So I was able to find the guy that was doing all the modern classical stuff, and I just reached out to him and emailed him, you know, and it was all there, and I sent him some stuff, and he started putting it on their playlist, which they actually pay out more than Spotify. So even a smaller playlist, you know, will pay out good money. So it's really, I mean, it's mixing all of that income, and then also too now with all these you know, like the Amazon Echo or Alexa, you know, like all that kind of like Google Play this.
Yeah.
A lot of people, I don't like think of Google Play as like a big streaming service, but you got to think of all those people that are using that to listen to music. And
It's all part of a bigger pie.
oh yeah.
And these are
Yeah.
just slices of that pie or pieces of
Yeah.
that pie. If you focus on just one, it's not going to last you very long.
Yeah.
So how do you go out and find these other sources to get your music established?
Yeah, like even in, like I manage this artist called The Shivers, that he's just strictly a singer-songwriter. And when we first connected, it was like he had no social media, didn't have any clue about the Spotify, you know, any of that. And
Now, this generation that's grown up, and I say this generation because it wasn't around when I was a kid, but my kids and my kids grew up with social media. There's still artists out there that don't fathom it or understand it or are connected to it.
I just met with one of my favorite songwriters this morning. He's kind of in the same predicament. He's older. He signed a big publishing deal years ago, and he was trying to get out of that. And he just finished this new album with like a big name producer, and he has like more of an old school manager that they're kind of just like doing the old, you know, trying to shop this record around and trying to look for a tour and hiring a big PR firm, like all this stuff that I would just advise against completely, you know. And I kind of explained that to him.
It's
just
kind of it's,
and like,
it's
yeah.
almost like the old major record label mentality. Because when I worked at the label, that's what we had in place.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
we had the hotline to the booking agents.
Yeah.
We had an in-house publicist. We had all these things that we could do for the artists, but we also had, as a record label, the record label had very deep pockets.
Yep.
To be able to cover this. The independent artist doesn't have that.
Yeah.
So they necessarily don't need it. They need to think smarter.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and I've worked with bands, even when I was in college, I was like, that's when vinyl to me was like coming back, and a lot of artists wanted vinyl. So we would print vinyl, and I was running things like in the old label format, you know, and I think like such a big thing was when you were running a label, you kind of had this like extra step of, even when digital stuff was like, you know, becoming bigger, you were the only one that had direct contact with Spotify curators, and you were the only one that had contact to this and this. I think in a way, like so many record labels are just scared shitless now because like that has all disappeared. You know what I mean? Like before, and I don't think it's like every label was like this terrible money grubbing label. You know what I mean? It's not.
No, but they were in the business to make money. I mean, that's really what it was about.
Exactly.
For them.
And I think before it was so much, it's like, yeah, you just couldn't do these things without a label. But now, even Spotify now with doing the direct upload and announcing that, you know, that's just like almost the last stone that now every single, not only label, but distribution service is like, we're out. And there's still, I think there's still things that labels can provide. I don't, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think that it's completely, you don't need a label, but I think it's just really depending on what you're I still work with different labels because they offer me different things as an artist. It's just more of like what fits for you and what are you trying to accomplish.
I'm one of those guys that, having worked both at big labels and indie labels, my heart really goes with the indie label, the small boutique operation, who I think, really is more hands-on. And your artist, and the artists kind of know the sales stuff, or maybe I should say the artist knows the team at the record label, and that's important. But we are doing business a whole lot different now than we did, say, 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I tell every single artist I work with, it's like I've been in so many different label situations, and I've done like major, I did a record through Decca Universal and had that experience, and it was great. It provided me a lot of contacts and got my music to places I couldn't do myself. But 10 out of 10 times, if you could find a smaller label, or even if it's a smaller management that's going to champion you and love your music and be there like 24/7, I would definitely just take that instead of a huge label that's going to put you on the back burner. Or I can't tell you the amount of artists that I've seen sign a big licensing deal that's exclusive, and then their music sits there for a year with
on the shelf gathering dust.
Exactly.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Distribution deal without a label, I mean, they're out there. You got to find them. They're not easy. But does that make sense to just go get a straight-ahead distribution deal without any kind of a label behind you?
Like you're saying, like a bit like the Orchard or ADA or Sony Red or something?
Yeah. What's your take on that?
I don't think even those, even something like the Orchard that I think takes whatever, 15% or something, it's just not even necessary, because unless, like, that's the whole thing is now the physical distribution. Like they could, there's boutique, like physical distros that could get your music to record stores. But to me, it's like at the end of the day, they're going to send out a list, to all these record stores, whoever's going to buy however many records.
And you're shipping product out, and, at the end of a 90-day or 120-day cycle, if it hasn't been sold, it's coming back.
And you're going to have to
then
buy
what do
them
you
back.
do with it? Yeah,
exactly.
You got to buy it back, or it becomes landfill. Or...
Yeah, exactly. So to me, it's like those deals don't even make sense anymore. And the distributor that I use, they're called STEM. They offer, like, my favorite thing, why our whole label is based off just like, I wanted artists to be able to have like in-depth stats and analytics about their release. And I wanted to be able to, like, you could just put in the splits that everyone gets. So right off the bat, you're accepting that you're going to get, so we give artists 85% of the sound recordings, and they keep 100% of the composition, the publishing, masters, all that. And the label is just me and 2 other guys, and we each only take 5% of the sound recordings.
Right.
Everyone gets paid out each month, and you have in-depth like stats and analytics about how the song's performing, where the money's coming from.
So you can actually fine-tune it down to regions.
Yeah, regions. It'll show you, each music platform, how the song's performing there. And I think almost at this point, every kind of indie distro is starting to offer that, being able to split the royalties and handle all the accounting.
And it makes sense.
It makes sense. Yeah, DistroKid is obviously one of the biggest, especially right now with Spotify. I think they bought some of them. So that's, if you've kind of just seen the path that Spotify's going, they're essentially going to become their own distribution service, kind of with DistroKid. And that's going to be crazy. It's tough to say how that's going to play out.
It's an unknown entity.
Yeah. If you've noticed, like, the way everything's going, at least from a background standpoint, like, they're offering, Spotify is moving towards like all live stats, and like you could see at any given time how many people are listening to your music, and it's becoming pretty, like, just crazy, the amount of what's at your fingertips. And now that they're doing they started doing licensing deals, directing, like contacting some bands directly, and they'll offer them a big chunk of money and then hold off on paying them royalties, because Spotify is obviously like one of the biggest companies in the world, but they lose hundreds of millions of dollars a year
consistently.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
we're going to take a break, and we'll come back. I want to talk about how the role of a manager, because you've kind of touched on that briefly.
Yep.
How that's different, and when an artist should decide to bring people onto their team, because that's definitely a valid question. In the studio with Kyle McEvoy, who is the label head of Sonder House, also has a recording studio. Home to 50-plus modern, classical, ambient, and instrumental musicians.
Hey, this is Doak Turner with Music Starts Here, and I'm sitting here with my pal Bob Bender, sharing expertise and wisdom right here on the business side of music. Stay tuned.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Wow, I just joined the Music Starts Here community. This is a truly hidden gem for anyone in the music business. Whether you live in Nashville or anywhere else in the world, Music Starts Here is like a GPS for your music career. This is the place to be if you want to get advice and direction from some seriously talented musical people who have been where you want to go. Music news, events, and a great big community with resources for artists, songwriters, musicians, studio and tech, along with music business advice from pros in the industry, all on one site? Make sure you get your free profile now. Go to www.musicstartshere.org. That's musicstartshere.org.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Hey, we're back in the studio. Here with us today, Kyle McEvoy, head of Sonder House, a record label and recording studio. We touched briefly on it, but let's dig a little deeper.
Yeah.
You know, the things that have changed, and this is a conversation we've had a lot about. You know, there's a difference between an agent and a manager.
Yeah.
There's kind of different managers sometimes. There's an artist manager, and then there's the business manager. What's the role of that manager now? How is it different? You know, because it really has changed because the industry has changed.
Yeah, I mean, with a lot of the artists that I manage, I'm kind of doing everything in a sense, you know, and I think to be a manager now, that's kind of what you have to do. I think so much of management back in the day was a little more like you were just there from like a reactive standpoint, you know, like either you were well established, you had your connections and you can make a break in artist career. But even now, you know, I think sometimes I meet artists that are like these incredibly talented artists that are very well capable of doing everything themselves, but they feel like they need to have like this team and the old school like management and an agent and a PR person. And then, you know, I just kind of see like they're spending endless amounts of times creating music and putting
money.
Yeah, oh yeah. And just putting everything into their works, and then they're just having management sit back and collect money when a lot of the times they're not being proactive.
Right.
And, you know,
It is, yeah, you're right. And it needs to be more of a proactive role than a reactive role. When does the artist, when should they decide to start bringing people in? I mean, there's got to be some kind of a benchmark on where you pick up that team. And then with that, what team members do you bring in first?
Yeah, I mean, my whole thing is like you can't really bring anyone on until there's really like money to be made. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So and I think from like now to even kind of things like PR is to me becoming like pretty just non-existent. You know, like before it would be you hire a PR person for an album rollout and you pay for whatever $1,000 to $2,000 for a big like PR campaign for 3 months before and after the album. And now it's like you can't be spending money on that because it's also not going to translate to sales anymore.
Exactly.
You know?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think at this point the most important thing is if the artists that I've seen really succeed in the past couple of years is just landing a huge booking agent that's going to get you on these big support slots and just really get you out there.
That's kind of the key component anymore if you want to get on the tours. If you're a young up and coming independent act, is kind of getting that key support slot.
And even, I mean, I've seen my buddy Mac DeMarco I used to tour with him when he first came to the States. He was a Canadian singer-songwriter, like indie pop dude. His booking agent, Michelle Cable at the time, you know, ran Panache Booking. And as things started really taking off for him, she just became like his management and everything because it was really like, that was it. You know, she was negotiating some big deals here and there in terms of like licensing. And then he had a label called Captured Tracks. But I mean, between just the label that was just constantly pressing vinyl that he could take on the road and this booking agent that was just kind of acting as like a management, that was it. It was just a two-person team pretty much.
And then when we talk about taking vinyl on the road, and whether it's vinyl or it's CD or even if it's a thumb drive, that concert merch, that tour merch is a big vital piece of income.
Yeah, when I was I went on tour with this band called Bare Hands, and this was a couple of years back, and they were supporting, so they got brought onto I think it was Q Prime management, which is like Cage the Elephant, Metallica, like crazy, you know, Red Hot Chili Peppers and all that. And that was like complete make or break for them. Like they got signed to Q Prime instantly. We're doing arenas with Cage, and I was doing merch, and every night it was like, if we didn't sell a couple $1,000s worth of merch, it was
Something
like,
was off.
It was off. You know what I mean? I mean, that was it, because I think that still happens where like a younger band will, you know, or like a smaller band gets asked to go support a huge band. And like from a listener's view, you know, if you're a fan going to a concert, you don't even think about that. But like that opening band is probably only getting like $150. You know what I mean? Or like,
it's barely paying their gas to get to the next city.
Yeah, I mean, if we didn't sell a couple $1,000s in merch, it was like we just lost money in the shows. You know, I mean, because they know that you're going to say yes to a tour, because what band doesn't want to go on an arena tour?
It still makes sense, but you're not going to make big dollars, at least not off of the performance fees.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why, I mean, those are kind of the biggest things now. It's just like merchandise. I work with some bands that we've set up. You know, there's like some companies that do merch fulfillment. So if you're the type of artist that's always on the road, you know, they'll ship you out merch when you need it, and they'll have a web store that they run and just pay out each month, and they take a small percentage. So, I mean, that with like the mix of streaming royalties. And
how many songs should an artist release at one time? Should it be one song, or should they do a full album? Should it be, you know, 10 cuts, 20 cuts?
So something that I started doing was I everything I record is almost just like improvised, guitar, one take, piano. I'll go in and just bust out like 10 songs in one session. And so I started making like monikers. I would make up just some random name, because I just had too much material. And by that time I really got into the independent playlisting thing, and I knew like connections and labels that had their own playlist. So I think at this point I have like 20 different names that I release music under. And I really keep my like main project just under my name. I try to keep it just to singles or small EPs, because the whole industry is just, I mean, it's exhausting. You know, it used to be like you spend a year or two making a record, and you do a rollout and you tour on it and you make another record. And now everything is just like quick. You know, it's like you put out a single in a month, you wait like a month and a half to see how that's doing. Then maybe you do another single, and you're constantly, I mean, our generation of just like millennials just doesn't really have an attention span.
I've always said it's kind of the microwave generation. As us growing up as kids, you know, we had to open the can and put it in the pot and you know, put it on the stove. Where now you just hit a button and it's there. And it's the same thing with music.
Yeah,
but it's still important that the quality of the music still be there, not just the quantity, but spending some time in the studio. And you made a valid point. We used to spend 6 months to a year in the studio before we would release an album, one of our artists. And then, they'd go out and they'd tour for a year. Yeah. And of course, while they were doing that, then we're finding new songs, and then they go back in the studio and spend another 6 months. We don't have those luxuries anymore.
Yeah, no, and I think that, I mean, even I just went and made this album in Chicago with the songwriter, and we were just co-writing, recording, doing it all in one take. And we did like 15 songs in 4 days. And those songs, we're going to go get a mix, get them mastered. And, you know, we're going to just put a single out, see how it does, and game plan around that. You know what I mean? Because it's also really like situational. Sometimes you put out a single and it gets on a huge playlist, and you know, that's the whole thing, is so much of it is playing into these algorithms now. You know, like when I put out a single and it gets on a huge playlist that's followed by millions of people, and at that time my monthly listeners is at a certain point, when I released another single, that song is going to go out to those 700,000 people that are currently listening on like Release Radar and Discover Weekly and everything. So you're almost kind of like waiting to see how it takes off. And when you think the song's kind of when it's about to plateau, that's how we've been doing it. But I mean, even like I think Kanye West, like his last album was 7 songs. And that's, you know, one of the biggest artists in the world. That was kind of like putting the stamp on the old way of doing things, you know, and it's definitely that constant battle of like being able to make quality content and not just throw it out there, but at the same time being able to stay with the way things are going.
How can people find you?
Sonder, I think the website's just thesonderhouse.com.
And that's SONDER.
Yep. Or, yeah, anyone could just email me. It's just Kyle McEvoy Music at gmail.com. My last name is MCEVOY.
Follow you on Twitter, Facebook?
I got Instagram. That's
Yeah?
my most, yeah. I'm not a huge social media person as much
Right.
as I tell all the artists to be posting about their shows and all that. But yeah, Kyle McEvoy Music is my Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all that. So,
Very cool. Kyle, thanks for being on the
yeah,
show.
thank you.
Hey, don't forget to check out our affiliates, including Lab Canna, fine hemp products since 2014. Click on their link on our website for more information and how to order their product line. Also, don't forget to check out our other affiliate, Music Starts Here. You can find them at www.musicstartshere.org. Probably the best one-stop shop for the singer, songwriter, or aspiring musician who is relocating to Nashville or wants to. Also, shameless plug for the business side of music. Become a YouTube subscriber. Check out our website at www.businesssideofmusic.com. Follow us on Facebook at the Business Side of Music Podcast or on Twitter at Business Side of Music Podcast.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Traci Snow and is produced by Bob Bender. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Los Angeles, California and Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound designed by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Fuson.